Hi everyone, welcome to another K-SAA video interview. If you want to find out more about the Keats-Shelley Association of America and even join us, then please go to our website, k-saa.org, or Google us, the Keats-Shelley Association of America. It starts at just $25 a year and includes a subscription to the Keats-Shelley Journal. Today, our communications fellow, Amy Wilcockson, is interviewing one of the founders and creative directors of Mary Shelley's House of Frankenstein in Bath. His name is Chris Harris, and he co-founded the museum with Jonathan Willis. Amy is going to be leading the interview today, so I'll hand over to her in a moment. But just to say that she is, as well as one of our excellent comms fellows, working on her PhD at the University of Nottingham, editing the letters of the Scottish Romantic poet Thomas Campbell. Over to you, Amy.
Thanks so much, Anna, and thank you a huge amount to Chris for being here and taking this interview with us today. I'm so excited to chat to you. I visited the House of Frankenstein last year and absolutely loved it. So yeah, so excited to chat today. So I thought I'd start, Chris, by just asking, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your interest in Mary Shelley? Kind of where did the idea of a House of Frankenstein come from?
Well, firstly, thank you for agreeing to talk to us. That's lovely. So it's, well, my interest in Mary Shelley, if I'm absolutely honest with you, didn't really develop until I realized that Mary Shelley wrote much of Frankenstein while living in Bath. I was obviously aware of her and aware of her good companions, the so-called League of Incest, and obviously Frankenstein. I grew up with Frankenstein as everybody else, and my sort of introduction to the Frankenstein was really through the Boris Karloff movies in the 1930s. Obviously, I wasn't around then. I saw them much later. But in terms of actually the conception of Mary Shelley's House of Frankenstein here in Bath, I have to go back several years. And this goes back to about 12 or 13 years ago, where the rise of these pop-up sort of seasonal horror attractions that are rife in America, but not so much over here. I found one that was actually sort of in the Midlands, and it really intrigued me. And my nieces used to go to this, and it was very popular, but it was only for 2 weeks a year. And I thought, how great would it be if we had if there was a sort of multi-sensory museum that sort of investigated the science of fear and phobia, what makes us scared. So you go into this attraction and it's ominous and it's ambient and it just terrifies you with all the things that genuinely terrify people. But it was an idle little thought that just popped into my head and stayed there forever, because I was never going to do it because it's not my world. I've never been in the tourism or leisure industry. So it was just an idle thought. Anyway, fast forward, 12, 13 years, however long it was. And the idea popped into my head again, and I just started doing a little research while living in Bath at this point. And I suddenly realized that Mary Shelley spent time here and wrote Frankenstein here. And it was a fairly little known fact up until quite recently. I mean, for 40 years ago, Christopher Frayling tried to get a commemorative plaque to sort of say that Mary Shelley wrote this great book while she lived here. But that was sort of brushed aside in the old days because it was considered a little bit too Hollywood for Bath. But obviously times changed, the council changes, the attitudes change, and finally a plaque was put there. So when I realized this, to me, suddenly all these things fell into place. I thought, we don't need to do, we can tell the story of fear and phobia, but the Frankenstein story. So that's when I started researching Mary Shelley. This is about 2018. And I've got to say, the more I read about her, the more intrigued I became, and the more, I won't say obsessed, that would be a bit weird, but I just found this person an extraordinary person, an utterly unbelievable person who has really, in the great scheme of things, so little recognition in terms of what she's achieved. So I actually just took a great interest in her, and what became more important was to tell the Mary Shelley story over the Frankenstein story, because I actually think it's a better story, although Frankenstein's a great story. And so the two came together, and it became Mary Shelley's House of Frankenstein, and it was very much about, we want to tell the story of Mary Shelley. It'll be an exhibition that chronicles her life in a multi-sensory ambient way, where the atmosphere is supplemented with audio soundscapes and ominous music and strange smells as you go into different rooms. And we made a decision quite early on, just in terms of obviously the Gothic side of things really kicked off more Victorian than it did Regency. So Mary was born into the late Regency period and obviously lived in the early Victorian period. So we went for that sort of slight Victorian feel, the steampunk Victoria feel. So we have got lots of Gothic curiosities about the place and strange and ominous sort of little creations and death masks. And so we went a little way down that line just to give it a little bit more atmosphere. So the thing really is, over 2 floors, we tell story of what inspired Mary to write the book. So it's not really a whole thing about her life. It's really the key components that inspired her, of which, again, as you're well aware, the death of her mum had a profound effect. Her father driving her sort of academically. Mary had no formal education, but her dad drove her with his library, and she was self-educated, spending a lot of time at her mum's graveside. Her fractious relationship with her stepsister, Claire, who, is a strange one, Claire, another brilliant character in her own right, but is instrumental in the story, and that it was largely down to her why they went to Geneva, because Byron needed to be answerable to this illegitimate baby she was carrying. And Mary's interest in science and how she would give lectures to or talks to visiting dignitaries to her dad's house. And so, and obviously introduction to Percy, her interest in phantasmagorias, ghost stories, and most critically, the death of her first baby, Clara. So all these little things, big things, fueling into her imagination when she's a kid, really, prior to her going to Geneva, where Byron obviously sets this competition, and it all happened there with these, I still keep reminding myself, these teenagers on holiday, really, where the foundations of Dracula were born, and obviously Frankenstein, 2 of the greatest horror stories, on the planet. And so it was, so from there we sort of tell the story of, what inspired her to write the book, and then we also chronicle the rest of her life and how it was turned into a play. The other important thing is that I honestly will pause for breath in a minute. Okay, so don't worry. The other important thing is to tell the proper story of Mary Shelley in a way that's actually just pays homage to this brilliant person, and hopefully mostly sensitively. We wanted to do that. So the other important aspect of the attraction is that, when we think of the creature, we always think of the Boris Karloff derivative and the green skin, flat top, bolts through the neck, which has obviously become one of the most iconic images on the planet now. And so the other thing we wanted to do was recreate the creature, which, as far as we know, has never been done, exactly as Mary imagined. And so, she obviously only gives a very brief description of the creature in the novel. And so what we did, we took that, and then there has to be a tiny bit of dramatic license, because it's not much of a description. It just really talks about his facial appearance. But he's made for human and animal parts, and clearly it's been put together in a rudimentary way, because this scientist was working in candlelight, probably for the most part, using terrible tools, and so the stitching is going to be rough, and there's going to be suppurating wounds. And I just thought, well, actually, in terms of clothing, because there's no clothes made to measure, so he's probably wrapped wounds in bandages and stitched them on, and they become a little bit part of the skin itself. So we had an idea. So we wrote quite a large sort of a description of what we wanted, and we approached a special effects company called Millennium FX, and they specialize in film and TV animatronics. And we worked with them and an artist called Chris Goodman, a phenomenal graphic artist. So he took what we described, and then he added his ideas to it as well. And over about a 12-week period, 13-week period, from the original conversations, the creature arrived on site and was assembled. And so he's an 8-foot creature, as closely resembling what Mary Shelley imagined. And so we just wanted to change 2 things. One, introduce people to the brilliant Mary Shelley, and hopefully she gets a little more recognition than she does at the moment. And also just to show people that the creature's not what you think it is. That's what we tried to tell the whole story of Frankenstein, finishing in the top room, where we have a small screening room where we show the very first movie, which is fabulous, proved really successful. That the 1910 film, Charles Edison film. Charles Edison? No, it's Charles Ogle, sorry, it's the Edison film. It's lovely, and because a lot of people have come to the house and never seen a black and white movie, a silent movie. And that's quite intriguing, seeing people's reactions. So that's the attraction. And in the basement, we have a scary walkthrough. It's a slight derivative of the Frankenstein theme. We couldn't tell the Frankenstein story, as it were, in the basement, but it's a derivative of it, and which is, again, proves very popular. If that's your thing, being scared witless as you're walking through cages and nasty noises and actors jumping out at you. And the other thing we have in the house, of course, is the escape room at the top of the house, which is called Victor's Lair. And that very much is based on a Frankenstein theme, where you're trying to assemble body parts to create this creature so you can escape the building. And we're continually coming up with new ideas, which I'm sure we'll come on to later. But anyway,
Yeah.
most haven't paused for a long time, so I think I've answered most of your questions. But perhaps
I was going to say, I think you've covered everything. No, I'm joking. No, I that was wonderful and really great to hear about all the different things that are kind of within the. I mean, this is my next question. How would you describe the site? Is it a museum, an experience, an attraction? Is it a combination of all of those things, do you think?
I think it is. I think it's slightly, but I don't think it's a museum as such, because we don't have lots and lots of things in glass cabinets. We have a lot of information because we wanted to go down the literary side rather than lots of multimedia. There's a little multimedia here, but so there are panels that you read. I've always thought of it as it's an exhibition. It's a permanent exhibition where it's there's really good artwork around the building. There's interesting items. We've got a 1.5 meter sculpture of Mary's head on one of the walls. There's lots of interesting props that have been handmade. Lots of vintage items that we've purchased celebrating Frankenstein in popular culture. So it's part museum, part visitor attraction. Complete homage to Mary Shelley, but as I said, it's quite a strange one, because what I didn't say is we're actually in Bath, in the centre of Bath. We're in a Grade 2 listed building in a heritage city, which is 4 floors of the building, a 7,000 square foot. With a basement, and so there are limitations of what we could do with it. We couldn't make any interventions to it in terms of building wise, so we had to work with the building, and that was actually quite challenging, about telling a story in a linear way where you can't move people in a coordinated fashion. So it was all very much right. You might have to go into a room and come back out of it again. So in a strange way, although it was quite complicated working out that flow, it actually works in our favor, because I think, without being disrespectful to any attractions, a lot of them are made in a similar way now, where they're quite homogenized. You're met, you're batched, you're given an introduction, and then you're guided for the first bit, and then it's self-guided, and it's very linear, and it's quite homogenized in some ways. And I think what makes ours interesting is it's not that at all. You come to the building and it's purely self-guided, but then you are discovering, you're going in and out of rooms. And I like to think of it as a bit of a throwback attraction. It has a slightly different feel to it. It makes it a little bit more eccentric. In addition to all the smells and sounds we've got, the building is presented in how it was 270 years ago. There's a lot of original features here. All the fireplaces are still intact. The architrave and a lot of the building is still as it was. So what we've done is decoratively have changed it. We haven't taken any of the features out, but the walls have been painted like they're damp and cracked. So we've had brilliant scenic artists in who decorated the house in a way that it feels like faded grandeur. We've got Jane Austen Centre down the road, and they tell a different story. And I think that a lot of the Jane Austen novels are presented in a rather sort of whimsical fashion, beautiful dresses, and everyone's quite prim and it's all clean. And I don't think that period was really like that. I think it was probably very grungy, and I think Mary and Percy's life even more so. And so we wanted to present the house as faded grandeur. So as soon as you walk in, it feels like it's damp. It's not, just painted to look that way, and the ceilings look like they're going to come down. And so it feels like the whole house is just atmospherically crumbling.
I love it. So obviously you've worked with a lot of different people to kind of bring the house together. So was it very theatrical, would you say? Like a lot of set designers, people like this, creating the special effects creature?
It was actually all very serendipitous how we did it, because we actually signed the contracts just before lockdown. And it's like, and then it just meant that when we got into the house, there were a lot of people who were available for work who wouldn't have been. And so it was a strange process, this, because nothing was ever put on paper. There was no drawings, no descriptions except for the creature. It was kind of all in the head. So we had a rough idea. And so it was like we go into a room and say, look, I want that there, that there, that there. This picture's going to go here and this here. But there was no pictures. It was just sort of all in our head. Eventually, I was forced to draw a couple of little things to help people out. But I'd say to the carpenter in the lab, for instance, I want that there, that there, that there, and that there. And then he would say, what if we did that? And you go, oh, that's a great idea. Let's do that. And so it was very much a collaborative process. So I would come up with what I wanted initially, and then you discuss it with the guys on site, some great scenic artists. It was only a small team, of scenic artists and props makers. And you know, and initially it was quite very much coordinated, but then you know the scenic artists would have techniques that I have no knowledge of. My background is theatre, but I still don't have the knowledge that they had. And they would say, "But can we try this?" And I say, "Well, what is? I don't know what that means." And so they would paint a bit of the wall, and you go, "Oh my gosh, I love that. Let's do that." And so we worked that way. And I think how it worked was everyone was happy, because you're working in a collaborative process where everyone's being listened to, and you know, you go down one route, but if someone comes up with a better idea, then you go that route. And so it just layer after layer, and it was really organic the way it all came together. And it was done in a strange atmosphere, as we all know, that period, but it was done with a great love and enthusiasm. And as the story was being, as the rooms were being unpicked and put together, the story of Mary was coming together as well, and everyone sort of grew with it. And so it was an interesting process. It was like a great big, I wouldn't say it was theatrical. It felt more like a sort of, it was a little, yeah, but artistic as well. It felt like everybody had a huge canvas to work on. And it's a big building, because it's not just the floors, it's the walls. So it's probably, in terms of the you know, and some of these are 11-foot walls. So in terms of actually, you know, you're talking the building 7,000 square foot, but in terms of the space, we're probably working on 25,000 square foot in terms of what we're trying to populate. It was a big undertaking, but you know, we did it in 7 months, put it together in 7 months. So it's and then obviously we got lighting designers coming in to light certain things, and lots of different people, you know, utilizing their great skills to put it all together. So yeah.
That's amazing. I can't believe you got it all done in 7 months as well. Like the speed.
I know. I know. It was nuts. So that's the creative director bit.
I was just going to ask you about this. This is my next question. Yeah. So I was just going to say, would you be able to share with us a bit about what you do as creative director? Kind of what do you get up to on a day-to-day basis? And following on from that, what is the best thing about being creative director? Well,
I think the creative director was just a sort of a hangover from when the whole project was being put together, because this sort of, my sort of madness led it, and then everybody else joined in, and then everybody else sort of had their own sort of moments of madness as well. But I think so. In terms of now, I'm on site most of the time. You know, you put it together, and then you just go, actually, that could be improved if we did this, and you're almost making tweaks. So it's not as crazy as it was, but you know, as a team, we've got an executive team of 5 of us, and we meet every week, and it's like, you know, it's ideas that are supplemental to the house. So for instance, when we had Halloween, obviously this house lends itself very well to Halloween. We had an after dark experience where it's really the house, but all the lights are off, and we have more actors in there, and that proved great fun. So then there's a creative process in that about how do we dress it and how do we do it. But that becomes very much more of a team effort at that point. I mean, from conception. So in the early days, it was sort of predominantly more me, but then nowadays it's like someone will come and say, how about we do this? And then that's how we work. We did a Valentine's event, which is a very eccentric event in the house, really eccentric, where we turned out, I mean, again, you go into these things not quite knowing what they're going to be, but the Valentine's event was dates to die for. No, I can't remember. I can't remember what the tag was now, but the premise of it was that Mary Shelley's House of Frankenstein is a very sensual house with all smells and evocative sort of items around the building, that people gravitate there looking for love. And so within the building, we had it like a date night. We had actors around the building who were just like the worst dates imaginable. So people would come to the house and they'd interact with these awful dates. But it sounds daft, but it did work. You've got this sort of strange, uneasy atmosphere with these sort of dates who are talking about Mary Shelley, but in a rather creepy fashion. It's very odd. I don't know. So, and then we're doing something which I can't disclose, because we've actually signed a little secrecy notice that we hope to do later this year. There's a big Halloween ball we'd like to do. There's some scare B&Bs which we'd like to look into, where we have these sleepovers. So these are all items that we'll do, sort of supplemental to the house, but it's part of the Mary Shelley brand. It's the horror experience, more horror experiences rather than the Mary Shelley story. And also we've just launched, obviously we have the escape room. We've just done a body in a suitcase, which is where a suitcase has been unearthed at Mary Shelley's House of Frankenstein, which we believe contains human remains. And you have 45 minutes to solve the mystery of the suitcase. So there are things like this. As far as the house is concerned, there are several things that we've already thought through about the changes we'll make, and it's just when we make them. So it's an ongoing process, but most of the creative stuff now is actually not necessarily in the house, but how do we move this out of the building? And a lot of it actually is getting people through the door. That's probably my role creatively. It's like, along with Vicky, who I work very closely with, and again, the executive team, is the general managers, and my business partner, John and Adam, is that, we need to get people through the door. These are quite hard times in terms of for visitor attractions. That people still aren't going to them as they were pre-pandemic. They'll come back, but at the moment, you've just got to work much harder to get them here. So we've got celebratory packages that we offer, children's parties, because we have a bar here as well. So we've got a lovely bar and kids can have parties there. We've had hen parties here, and we'll have events at sort of after hours as well. So it's creatively, it's more now business.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And it kind of ties into what I was going to ask you next as well. I was just going to say, obviously the Mary Shelley story is a massive part of it, but there's so many other draws for other people as well, right? If you're not interested in Mary Shelley, the attraction is that there's the escape room, it's a horror experience, it's experience, as you say, in the basement that I must admit I was too scared to go into. I went downstairs, looked in, and I thought, no, I'm not going in there. But it's those things as well, right, that drawing in other people. So you get the horror lovers, you get the literature lovers, I guess, and that's what you're saying, kind of working.
I think so. I think what's really important here is that because we set this, we did all the marketing and all the business side of this before there was an attraction. So again, and so we've got the sort of the horror side of it quite well done in terms of the advertising, but I think people also do forget there's a literary story here. Now we made a choice. There's a lot of information here that people probably wouldn't know about. Most people wouldn't know about Mary Shelley. I'm sure your good selves know everything, but there'll be things that most people don't. But we had to tell the story in a way that wasn't too academic or too literary, because it will just alienate people. So there's a lot of information here about a lot of interesting people. But yes, so you learn about Percy and the tragedy. There's a friend of ours called Sheila Hannon who does Frankenstein tours, and she calls the Frankenstein story or the Mary Shelley story, it's EastEnders for posh people, and the drama that's actually sort of involved in this story with it's a really dramatic story, and hopefully we tell that in a way that's actually approachable and sort of we want to get to as many people as we can with it.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the room. I think it's the first room you go in, isn't it, with the brain on the wall, and you walk in and there's all the different boards about all the different characters, all the different figures, I guess, in Mary's life, which I thought that was really, really cool, and I enjoyed how you displayed that. Well,
I think on that's a good example, because what in terms of actually what I didn't want to do right from the word go was actually sort of just take reproductions from the Natural Portrait Gallery and put them on the wall. So we wanted to reinvent every character. So we took sort of other artists and made derivatives of their work. So Shelley, I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff Koons' work, but it's very kitsch. And I thought, well, that's got to be Percy. I can't get past, but Percy's a bit of a rock star to me, and he's, I can imagine him sort of being in a Jeff Koons picture, sort of rather sort of colourful and sort of it's odd, and Mary's mum is based on a French photographer where her head is in a bell jar. So we've presented all the characters in a way that best reflects them. Byron is done as a photo shoot, so there's about 16 pictures. So I think Byron was probably quite egotistic. So there's those little things of going, let's present them as Claire is presented as a Cindy Sherman, as a broken doll, because I think you changed the name a couple of times and she seemed quite a lost character. So we're trying to reflect the personalities in the paintings and the artists. So yeah, I think you did that really, really well. So I wanted to ask, obviously you've mentioned the giant kind of animatronic creature, but is that your favorite item out of all the exhibits? Are there any others that kind of stand out to you, or anything that whenever you see it you think, I love that? What's your favorite? I have to be honest, I just think it's the fact that we actually pulled it together, because I think what I should say is that my background's writing and sort of video production. Jonathan, my partner, he's a serial entrepreneur, but he also worked in film and writing as well. we had never done a visitor attraction or worked in the leisure industry. So we worked with Vicky, who's, has had work in this industry, and John and Charlotte, who both work in sort of visitor attractions. But my thing is, from a personal level, is that we pulled it off. That we've actually, you walk into the building, you think, oh my gosh, this is a really, modesty aside, it's a really cool building, telling a great story in an entertaining way. As I said, it's not, I think the one thing I'd like to sort of establish is it's not a theatrical event. It's not immersive theatre where you're being, it is quite understated. I think people are surprised how cool this building is, that it's dark and it's ominous and it's telling quite an interesting story. And it is dramatic, but in a more visceral way rather than a showbiz way. It's not a showbiz attraction. So, but I think I'm just proud of the attraction and that we all pulled it off, I think. But I love the creature, of course.
I don't know how you can. You move aside those creepy curtains, right, and you walk in and that's just staring at you, and then it starts moving.
His eyes, isn't it? His eyes finally catch you, and his brow furrows.
Yeah.
There's not a huge number of animatronics in there. It's just facial expressions and his breathing. And that's all you wanted. That's again what we wanted to do. We didn't want an all singing, dancing creature. We wanted absolute subtlety in terms of, and I think that's it. I think the attraction's subtle.
Yeah,
I might disagree. You might say
I agree.
It's not subtle, Chris.
Subtle horror, I think. Like me and my friend walked in that room and we were looking at the creature and then looked away from it at something else, looked back, and I was like, his face has moved. I think his face has moved, and it kind of, it gets you in that way, which I think is what the attraction, what the exhibits kind of do, which is really cool. You've touched on this briefly, and I just wondered what's next for the House of Frankenstein in the coming years. Well,
at the moment, it's very much more just sort of consolidating what we've got and sort of building on it and sort of just making tweaks to the attraction. I think it's just slightly waiting for the climate to change on the other things, because obviously we've come out of pandemic, people are still adjusting. Obviously this awful war in Ukraine has had an effect on people, and particularly through the cost of living and stuff like that, aside from everything else. And so I think people are tightening their belts, and so it's the other stuff. You think, what's the appetite? So I think we just have to hang fire on one or two of the things, but we are developing them so that they'll be good to go when the time is right. And as I said, there's the sleepover we want to do, which I think will be great fun. Jonathan termed it Scare B&B, and that would be it's like an Airbnb. It's a sleepover, but as we've done in the house, where there are a computer sort of generated special effects, the house. Again, this might not be your thing. It'll be some people's things, where you go to the house and it will have 3 levels of terrifying. So if it's a sleepover event, but it may well be that that little things happen in the house up to midnight for the light version, up to 2 o'clock for the stronger version, and all night for the. But it's things like things will move, and it's a scare event. It's a Scare B&B. So it's just that's something we're looking forward to doing. So it's. And as I said, that's something I can't tell because we've got a non-disclosure agreement, which I'm very excited about. But yeah, there are lots of things we're planning. It's just when we actually implement them. Yeah.
And that's very exciting. So will those things be coming up on your website or on your social media? So if everybody keeps an eye out on there, they'll be the first to know, I guess.
Indeed, yeah. We've got the Bath. I think it's a literary festival coming up soon, right. So we're promoting the house in that regard. But it's also just it's tying ourselves in with lots of other events, because there's a tremendous amount of awareness we need to still get the awareness out there, just to let people know that we're here.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think we're going to round off there, but it's been so lovely to chat to you, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I can't wait to visit House of Frankenstein again, and hopefully build up the courage to go in the basement and be scared.
We'll take you down. Well, thank you for coming, and let us know when you're coming back, and hopefully you can get down here as well, Anna.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you. Sorry I didn't stop rabbiting. That's the way. I'm too excited about this project not to shout about it. Anyway, come and visit. I'd love to see you and all your followers. Take care. Many thanks.